Hey, Crystal and Steve, how's it going? Can you hear me? Yeah, okay, great.
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Yeah, it was uh, pretty good session yesterday. I liked it, you know.
It was.
Yeah, I mean, it I think, oh, my wife's out there talking. But anyway, a lot of that I think applied to what we're going to do too. I think, uh, this last session here is that we're going to look at is going to be very profound. I think it's. Oh, Amy's closing. But anyway, I thought we would look at. I like the. Wait, Gar here. Okay. Hey, Gary, how are you doing? I'm always confused by because it says Garf. I would say, who's Garf? Okay. Well, anyway, we're just
Probably an alias.
Yes. Okay, Miles is here. Okay, well, I thought we would just look at the last at the 5 drawings, but before we did, and then I thought next week we just start in on like active imagination or dreams or whatever. I mean, just books about how to, and one that's just fabulous is one by Jeffrey Raff, which is called Ally Work. And he is, has been doing this for 40 years. And he's reached the point where he can, of course, he's always been a very, a very permeable person, but he started out because of the reason he actually went to Zurich at the same time that that Gary Sparks went there, and he was also a student of Marie Louise von Franz, and but anyway, I don't know of anything more profound than his comments on active imagination. His specialty is in alchemy and active imagination. I actually went to a session with him, and it was kind of a seminar, and it was just fabulous. I mean, it was absolutely fabulous. But I thought we'd start out in just a couple of the really important parts that we're skipping, and one
Hey,
of
Craig.
them, yes.
Just full disclosure here. Now that I've been in the group for a while, I don't really. I've never studied active imagination. I don't fully understand active imagination. I have my imaginations about what active imagination is. Garf talks a lot about it. I know in his own experience, he uses it. But I'm wondering if you can just give me an idea. It's got to be more, I imagine, than just a fantasy, just making an imagination of something, right?
Yes. And Jeffrey Raff makes a big distinction between fantasy and the imaginal world, which is, the word imaginal comes from the word to magnify, and it means to expand. And what active imagination in is role is to expand consciousness, and what they mean by expanding consciousness is to allow unconscious contents to come into ego awareness, and then to have a dialogue with them. And the reason Jung said it was more powerful than dreams is because there is there are, you can go and you can ask questions. You can you'll see things. I mean, I do two types of active imagination. The first one is the hardest, and I'm not that great at it. Is the visionary, and that means what I really do is I go into. Hi Tim, how you doing? We're just getting started here. We're just talking about what active imagination is, and I just mentioned that it's, I mean, this is what Anna Marjula has been doing all this time, but it is an ancient practice, an ancient practice. Peter Kingsley says that all of our European civilization came from people lying down in dark places and and letting uh, having vision quests and shamanic journeys. I mean, this is what it's all about. And one of the things that Jeffrey Raff mentions, as far as both Peter Kingsley and Jeffrey Raff are students of Henri Corbin, who's this fabulous French student of the imaginal world, and he particularly of the Sufis, which are uh, a school in Persia. It was started in Persia, and Persians are not Arabs. I mean, they're sort of more Indo-Aryan. They're closer related to the people of the Caucasus than they are the Middle
Oh, that's
East.
interesting.
Yeah, and so I mean they're retaining, just like my father comes from Norway. I mean the Norwegian psyche, and also the Irish psyche is 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 very pagan. I think the German psyche is too, you know, but it's particularly the Sufis. And what one of the things Sufis say is there is no such thing as a universal truth. The only thing that is universal is the unique revelations of every individual, you know, and the idea there is that through this and you'll find this at the end. Anna is I don't think she intended to be go into alchemy, but I mean what she's basically saying is that her um, uh, that God asks her for succor. He asks her for help, and this is something that I experienced just like 2 days ago in an active imagination. I'll describe how I do it myself, because I've done it. It's been a long process of developing. It's like learning to play the violin. I mean, you just don't do it immediately unless you're a natural born violin player and you don't need any teachers or practice or anything else. It's to try to teach the ego to lose its critical attitude, particularly um, in uh, modern day. Now if you had lived in a indigenous tribe, you know, they really never experienced the separation from nature, not only as ego separates from the animal, but also as their life separated from what Chief Seattle called the body heat of the pony, and the running waters, and I mean we're very impoverished from the experiencing the four seasons and experiencing dawn and dusk and middle day and then the long night. And you can imagine the long night without anything but a central fire, you know, and the stars are there. And then you watch the moon and you don't know where the moon comes from. And here's a real um, uh, purpose of active imagination. It's not, it is to lend ego awareness to this unique revelation within you, which you were born with. You know, this is something the Sufis also believed in, is that there is no one face of God.
Would you repeat that again, Tim? The purpose is to lend ego awareness.
Okay, you lend your ego, you lend it, you lend consciousness. This is the one thing we have that no other animal has. And you know, like we were talking about last time, where you know, Earth was just this rock, and through some type of strange emanation from this equilibrium comes a peacock. You know, well, now this is amazing, but it really was somewhat of an emanation. The only way that the emanating force that created the peacock can become conscious in time and space is to have some vehicle that is separated from the animal or the life force, and that's the ego. And that's really the purpose of ego consciousness. It's not to you know, pile up money in your bank account, you know, or to solve math problems, even though apologies to Gary there. Gary's a mathematician. But anyway, the purpose is we separate from the animal nature. And now this emanation that from this improbable state of order created the peacock now has a partner with which it can dialogue. It doesn't want to be worshiped. It wants to become conscious. So we lend our ego awareness. That is really the purpose of active imagination. And this seems to be somewhat, it's found everywhere. You know, it's found in the, in any shamanic tradition, you know. But the problem right now that we're having with this ego consciousness that we have, that is not only separated from our bodies, but also separated from nature, from living in harmony with nature and with the Tao and with those people that at least are in our in group, you know, is we are now, you know, and we've lost all connections with any collective myth. So all our collective myth is gone, you know. So now we're adrift. And Jung said he knew what it was like to, and he got this lesson from Mountain Lake and also from some of the African tribes he met, is he knew what it was like to live with the myth, and he knew what it was like to live without a myth. And a myth is a symbol of meaning, you know, like we shouldn't be called Homo sapiens because, you know, that means thinking man. That's one of four functions, you know. I mean, who came up with that name? We should be called Homo mythicus, which is meaning making man or symbol making man. I mean, this really describes the long arc of the human, the hominids, the non-knuckle walking hominids, as Joe Campbell calls us, then thinking man, you know, because thinking man is one function. There's also feeling, there's also sensation, and there's also intuition, which are all should not be undervalued. So anyway, the principle of active imagination is which you can't really get in dreams. And but basically what I do though is I discuss the dreams with this lending my ego awareness to these figures, and I do it through active automatic writing, and any of us can do that. Automatic writing is something any of us can do. I mean, before I start automatic writing though, I do a meditation, you know, just to quiet the critical functions primarily. But since I'm doing the meditation, I also try to do somewhat of a small little shaman journey. So, I'll just tell you that the other, it's been Jung's way of doing this, which was not automatic writing, and Marie-Louise von Franz was automatic writing. Barbara Hanna's was. This is something any of us can do. But Jung imagined digging a hole, and he dug the hole until his head was below the hole, and then he would swim through the dirt at the bottom to get somewhere, and he'd come out. Well,
Craig?
I tried doing that too. It was I've been doing it for maybe a couple of years now, and so I'm still in it. And Jeffrey Raff says it takes years to develop this visionary aspect. It does not take years to do the automatic writing. But it was like 2 days ago, I experienced this where I go to this top of the ridge. This is the departure point. The departure point for Jung was the hole he dug. Okay. And
hey, Craig.
Yes.
So can you tell me a little bit about the automatic writing? Is this like an artist creating, and it's automatic, meaning that there's not a conscious direction to it?
Yes.
I'm not familiar with it. So
okay. Well, automatic writing is I'm going to just show you.
I imagine somebody being blindfolded and scribbling on a piece of paper, that kind of thing. So automatic writing is it streaming thoughts like
well, no, it's very conscious. I've got like 3 or 4 books filled like that. And
really?
And what it is you ask a question, and then with an uncritical attitude, you answer. Okay. And Barbara Hanna says, don't worry that you think I did this. And, we were talking, Gary and I were talking about this, I think last week. Don't worry that you did it with conscious intention. She says, you will very quickly find that there is no way that you could have said some of these things. And that's what Anna Marjula is doing automatic writing. I mean, these long written dialogues did not come through vision. They came through automatic writing,
So is this a tool you could use for shadow work then?
Oh,
like you could ask a question and just let something emerge from the shadow. I mean, is that?
Well, yes, you want to talk with your shadow. And this was really, the shadow is typically your instinctual life that you're ignoring, or it's your compulsive behavior. Now, in Anna Marjula's case, it was definitely her femininity. It's hard to say, but I mean, it was her instinctual life, which she was so removed from. And the only way that she could heal herself is through making peace with her shadow, and because she her sin against nature was that she never experienced her instinctual life. She's devoted all of her energy to music, which was a logos thing. It was not the feminine, her feminine task, you know, and so she was so divorced from that, she was impoverished of instinct. So what she needed to do was to have this dialogue with Shadow to de-beard, as the alchemists say, or, you know, depotentiate the archon of Animus, this daemonic figure within herself. And once she had done that, then the Animus could play its proper role of being you know, the bridge to God, you know, or the self or the divine world, you know. And you know, actually it acts as, you know, in myself, and I'm very much like Anna Marjula, is I do not respond well to a masculine deity. You know, I just don't have any relationship with a masculine deity. And what I need is rootedness and the earth, and to feel comfortable in my own body. And that was because I was so disembodied for most of my life. You know, so that's my return to, it's part of my shadow. You know, my other shadow is just the fact that my inferior function is sensation. So I tend, my wife says, you know, you just sit there and eat and look at your iPad. You don't even, you're not mindful of what you eat at all. You know, why don't you savor it? I mean, because she does so much seasoning of the foods and stuff, and she thinks it's all being wasted on me. And I said, well, my inferior function is sensation. She says, don't tell me that. She says, I don't care about that. You know, you need to practice that. But anyway, and that the shadow tends to be your compulsive behavior, but it's also is typically, for most of us, is our instinctual life. Or sometimes we can be too instinctual. So now our shadow is our spiritual life. And in that case, it's a positive shadow. You know, you'll often find that people who are involved in the underworld, their shadow is very positive, you know, very spiritual. You know,
say, Craig,
go ahead.
You keep mentioning Jeffrey Rath, and you in a different session mentioned that ally work.
Yeah, I'm going to send out a link to that. I thought you guys will be blown away just maybe by the first chapter. It's crazy.
Well, I looked for it online, so I couldn't find it. If you could just send us a link.
Yes, I'll send you a PDF of it. And I think, you know, what I was thinking is we would just go through ally work, and then we could go through like Robert Johnson's book of inner work. We could go with Barbara Hannah's Encounters with the Soul. And we'll become like these super experts on active imagination and dream interpretation. You know, we can also look at, there's a wonderful collection of all Jung's writings about alchemical imagination. We might even want to do that one next.
Just to add a comment, and you already said this, but you know, for the automatic writing, you know, I think it can be more valuable to think of it as what you're doing is, again, and Craig mentioned this, you're lending your consciousness to these other beings. So it's like, you know, it's like you're just like, okay, now it's your turn to speak, and you know, and so it's supposed to be that, you know, your ego is not any part of this. Now, Robert Bosnak, he uses a slightly different approach to this. So like, let's say you've had a dream, and I'll give an example. Like I had a dream, you know, that involves some crocodiles. And so instead of lending my voice to them, what you would do is like, and I was sticking my hand in their mouth, you know, probably not a very smart thing. You know, what he would do is he would say, okay, imagine yourself as the crocodile, and, you know, I want you to feel, you know, this hand in, you know, touching the roof of your mouth. And so the idea is that, and this is tough for me too, because like sensation is also my inferior function. But the idea is that as you build up, the sensation of what the crocodile is feeling, and, slowly switching your perspective over to this other being, that suddenly you have what he calls embodied imagination. And literally, you now feel the viewpoint of this alternate. And so I guess you might think of that as being, a slightly different shamanic journey in getting to the point that you can do this. And so, especially if it's something which is, a bit difficult for you to imagine what this would be like, starting off with the sensations and like, how they're moving and what they feel around them, so that you can accomplish the transference. Go ahead, Craig.
Yeah. Well, and that the crocodile too would be somewhat similar to a toad or a frog or a serpent or a dragon or something. And this kind of represents the collective unconscious in its before we lend our voice to it. It is it's not conscious yet. It is a being that's very you'll see in drawing 1 of Anna Marjula, she is enclosed with the Great Mother inside a dragon's head, and but what Gary says is exactly right. Particularly, you want to experience both sides, and and Jung's, when he first was doing his visionary work, his anima was mute and blind, but she was mute too, and he discovered that she didn't have vocal cords. So that was when he lent his voice to her through automatic writing. He would lend his voice to her through automatic writing. That's one way you're lending your voice to, and not just your awareness, but at least you're lending the power of speech, the use of grammar, and the ability to form thoughts to the unconscious.
Hey, Craig.
Yes.
Just as another bearing question here to get my bearing on all this. So you talked earlier about dreams, and Gary's talking about dreams, but we're also talking about active imagination, this automatic writing. So in dreams, symbols show up from the unconscious. Do symbols show up in active imagination or in automatic writing, or is that a different expression?
Yes, they do. I would say that in active imagination visioning, they are similar, image based, in their character, where in automatic writing, they tend to be auditory, and they tend to be, oral. I mean,
what do you mean auditory? Auditory
well,
symbols?
I mean that it's going to be something that you hear, or it be speech related, something that is speech related, where a visionary has both qualities, but primarily would be somewhat similar to dreams. The dream is always a great puzzle, and to Jung's people tell Jung, it's why do they speak such an obscure language? And Jung says they don't speak an obscure language. They speak an ancient language, which we no longer understand. I mean, you would understand it better if you had not left, the environment in which our bodies was shaped, which was, close to the earth, close to, the weather, and the animals and the plants and all of that. I mean, once we are separated from that, then it's very difficult for us to understand this voice has not changed, since, for 30, 40,000 years, but it's adapting, and it likes. I mean, the whole idea with that I think, this is just my own speculation, is the reason that we've been pushed so far away from nature right now is so that we can be a very strong, very adequate, very abstract vehicle for this voice of nature to have a dialogue with. The more abstract we are, the more devoid of symbols we are, the more pure this dialogue can eventually be. I mean, because that was, I think, what the self wants. It wants something that has burned off all of its projections. And
So Craig, are you saying that our modern psyche has the advantage over somebody from an indigenous culture in that we have facility in abstract thinking, so it's easier for us to derive the meaning from it?
No, not that. I mean, yeah, what I meant was this. I mean, I'm not saying that that's wrong, but what I'm saying is that what my point was being this is that the unconscious wants to have a dialogue with an extremely abstract being so that it can evolve faster. See, sometimes in indigenous tribes, the evolution of the God image is very slow, very gradual, but with a modern human who is so far away from that rooted existence, it can happen more rapidly. I mean, we're moving into the age of the water bearer and thing, but it still speaks to the reason that ego is so powerful, so far away from nature, so abstract, able to, my wife and I were just amazed at the technology of an Apple phone. I mean, she was just, wanting to move one of her icons, and she couldn't remember how to do it. And she says, I think that's cool how they just shake. I said, yeah. I said, that's why I tell people about our copy machine at work. I said, you can give me all the 2x4s and all the hammers and all the nails. I could never make that copy machine. It's so incredibly subtle, and can you think? I mean, we are evolving technologically. I mean, some people are saying that once they started to have, once infant mortality went down to a very, very low level, that the biological evolution of hominids has slowed down, and yet the technological, and this is the abstract type of evolution, is just incredibly at a fast pace right now.
What'd you say triggered that, Craig? What triggered the slowdown of biological evolution?
The lowering of infant mortality.
Oh.
When infant mortality went down to a very, very low level, and then every, rather than maybe 50% of the births surviving to adulthood, now there's a much higher percentage. So there's a much broader bell curve and more homogeneous development, where you had a short bell curve, the samples, there'd been a lot of filtering out. And right now there's, because of the dropping of infant mortality, there's less filtering out. I mean, that's just a theory, but who knows?
Well, it's it's fascinating, but it's also fascinating that you're suggesting, I think you're positing this, and tell me if I'm wrong, that by it being estranged from nature, the differentiation makes our evolution faster psychologically.
Well, I think it makes
Slower.
it makes the biological evolution slower. It makes the logos and technological evolution faster, and it makes the evolution of the God image faster. So the only one that's been slowed down is the biological evolution.
And I think it's so interesting that the current pandemic is going to self-correct in that regard to a certain degree, because it is so broad, it is so universal, and it's going to wipe out a swath of humanity that has been protected by our technological evolution.
Well, it remains to be seen. I don't know what I can't tell you what happens on that. My grandmother we got a little letter. When she was experiencing the 1918 flu, which, what did it have? 50 million deaths with a much smaller biological or world population. I mean, she wrote this. She visited with my mother a cemetery in Minnesota where she lived as a young girl, because she wanted to revisit the mass graves they dug at that time, because it was so traumatic to her when she was a young girl, that she helped take these bodies that were just dying like flies. They didn't have enough people to dig the graves, so they wanted to stop the infections, so they would bury these bodies in mass graves and then put quicklime on them, to disinfect them, and then bury them. And that, she, in her old age, wanted to visit. That was one of her things that she wanted to do, was visit that. But anyway, regardless of the current situation, which is not good, this is a weird time, I'll tell you. Woo, I've never seen anything like this in my life. But the idea then is just to come back to the active imagination, is that the more abstract, of course, we're out to this such a far extreme right now, and this poem of Yeats, we're turning and turning in a widening gyre. The falcon is us, can't hear the falconer. That we've separated from the falconer. So how do we get back with the falconer? It is through lending our awareness. And I was going to just mention this kind of a haunting image that I just had 2 days ago. I go from this horizon that I'm at. I go down into this valley, and I usually try to meet there the guardian of the door, who is the woodpecker woman, who lives near the near the river, the flowing unconscious, and she lives there as the master of woodpeckers, or the spirit of the rooted things. And then I greet her. Then I go down into the water, and instead of either finding a cave or swimming across this time, I just sunk down. It's a very pleasurable feeling, just sinking down into the depths and not worrying about anything, just going all the way to the bottom. And then when I get to the bottom, this is happening not entirely through conscious intention. It is a strange thing of just letting happen what happens. Marie-Louise von Franz says, it's like a cat watching a mouse hole. You know, the cat's observing the mouse hole, but it's doing it in a way while it's remaining somewhat still, but you do go forward. And you know, anyway, I get down to the bottom, and then suddenly I walk out into a dark landscape, you know, and suddenly this voice speaks, and it says, "Welcome to our world, torn with cruelty." Now, to me, that meant it's torn with neglect and being ignored and not being taken seriously, that it's a real entity. You know, my wife and I both have had dreams where I had this, all these people are being held prisoner in a dungeon, and there's a wise old woman is the guard, and she tells me, if you will only say out loud that these prisoners are real, they will be free. You know, and my wife had a dream almost at the same time I did, that there was her animus figure. She's hearing from all kinds of people, is dying. He's dying, and she doesn't take it seriously. She just ignores it. But everybody was telling her this, many people. And so finally she says, well, I better go look, you know. So she goes out to try to find this important male figure in her life. And she sees him, and he is dying in the street, but she can't get to him, you know. So I mean, this and you'll find this in alchemy when the in Aurora Consurgens, you know, this beautiful act of imagination that supposedly was done by Thomas Aquinas, you know, but she says this beautiful that says, do not look upon me with my blackness, and that I'm deep in the mire, you know, the darkness has made me this color. I mean, our neglect has made her this color. If anyone will come to see me, I will give into their hands the morning star. Now, that's one thing you find about if you start having these dialogues with this and lending your voice to these figures, they respond with love, with a love like you've never experienced. And I mean, because they long for the light. They long for the light. And the light is the light of ego consciousness or ego awareness. So anyway, that's kind of the idea of active imagination. But what is so unique about it, too, is that we're unique. Each one of us are complete individuals. This is a great mystery. And Jung said that he didn't this being that, you know, emanated all of these creatures did not want thousands of dreary little mirrors reflecting him and worshiping him. That was not what the purpose was of ego consciousness. It was to have a vehicle for this emanating force of life to become conscious itself, but not the universal one, the one that we are born with. And what Jeffrey Raff says is this self, which is unique to us, not unique to anyone else. It's our unique self. It's not a universal self. Is the twin of our soul. So we have a soul, which is, you know, our contrasexual. Okay, you got the shadow, you've got the soul, and then you've got the shadow is more the personal unconscious. The soul is, this is the being who we will unite with at death. You know, I mean, that's the wedding. you know, that is always described. You know, a nun is about to die, and she walks into her, she has a dream that she walks into her bedroom and there's a wedding dress laid out on her bed, you know. And so anyway, but the self is not a central self to all the universe. It is the self that is unique to us and is going not to evolve with the collective, it's going to evolve with us. It's
So
going to develop.
let me
Yes.
try to get a clarification on this. You said, what is it that is the twin of the soul?
Jeffrey Raff calls it the ally, you know, but it basically is the that is a word that he got from Carlos Castaneda, and also from I don't know, you guys have heard of Don Juan and Carlos Castaneda possibly, but you know, beautiful books. They were very famous in the 50s and 60s, you know. But the ally, he says he wishes he could get a better word for it. He doesn't like that word, but he doesn't know how else to describe it. But it's the inner partner, the inner divine partner. Now, that is unique to us, that's born with us and lives with us through our entire existence. And the soul and this inner partner are waiting for us.
And I don't understand why they are not the same entity, because I've always thought of the soul as being the guide to the unconscious. Like,
well, you don't have to differentiate them. You can. I mean, I just saying, usually the animus are thought of as the bridge. And unless you become conscious of your shadow, they're married to your shadow, you know. And then so now you got two beings in the nature world that are plotting against you. They're both this was what anima Jula faced. If you don't do your shadow work, as Steve was mentioning, the anima, who's the bridge, she's somewhat like the transcendent function, but she's the one who with us is going to produce the philosopher's stone or the divine child. This is going to be the shared center of awareness. That's a very important term, the shared center of awareness that we have with this ally figure, this inner partner who is related to the self. And that's Jung's word for this figure, because he didn't like using the word God because it had too many connotations, especially the fact that it's not, it's one-sided. It's all about goodness. Or, you know, in Judaism, it was all about, you know, righteousness. That was not the self. The self is divine energy, and it's the one that creates the quaternities, you know, creates the wholeness, the four, you know. So he called it the self, but he got that from Hindu term, which they used for you know, I don't know if you guys ever heard of the Gospel of Ramakrishna, you know, Sri Ramakrishna. Well, he would always ask people who come to him. He says, "Do you like to speak of God in personal form or abstract form?" You know, and if it was abstract form, then he would talk about Brahman, you know, which is just the word. It just means the energy of the universe. It's the sound Om, you know. That's what the self is, you know. And or you could speak with some avatar, you know, like Shiva or you know, Kali or Krishna, you know. So he was giving him the option because he could speak either language, you know. But anyway, so that's the self. And it is a subtle distinction, Tim. But I think the problem with not having a term like the soul is because the self is genderless. Okay. The soul is our contrasexual half. We both, men and women, possess the X chromosome and the Y chromosome. And if we're you know, focused on the Eros side, we lack logos. I mean, if you're on the Eros side, you know, it's Earth in need of the air beings. If you're on the logos side, you're air beings in need of the Earth. You know, and so that's, I think, the idea of the soul is that it unites the genders, because Eros and logos as differentiation are extremely important. You know,
Hey, Craig, can I ask you to repeat that again? So the soul and the self, I've never heard these differentiated as not being the same. So the soul is contrasexual and
yes,
the self is gender, non-gender?
Yes, the self is genderless. You know,
okay.
And the soul, now this is not necessarily universally true, because, you know, we have a lot of line of spectrum on the gender identification now. And there are some people whose bridge figure within them is their same sex, but that's because, you know, then their biological sex, because they identify as not their biological sex. So it tends that the being that they need to become whole is not their biological contrasexual figure, but their psychological contrasexual figure. So, I mean, that would be the whole spectrum. But typically, you know, for a man, he's or a woman, they are tilted towards Eros or logos. And to become complete, they need to unite with the other gender in some way, you know. So that's, I think, the purpose of this other figure than the self and the shadow is the soul. The soul also has, rather than spirit, and you know, there's a logos spirit and there's an eros spirit. Eros spirit tends to be lumen natura. It's the light of nature, and the spirit that we overemphasize is this spirit of the air. You know, this pneuma spirit, which you know, is sort of completely divorced from the earth, where the spirit of the rooted things, which would be like the woodpecker, you know, this is
All right, Craig,
takes flight. What?
I gotta slow you down a bit. I apologize. So we're talking about the eros as spirit, but is that not tied then to the anima? Is the anima not also spirit? I guess I'm you know, it's probably the term I'm confused
eros,
with.
I'm just saying that spirit is soul has body in it. You know, a soul has a subtle body, and it has a little bit of denseness and a little bit of gravity, whereas spirit has none. It's totally air. But it doesn't have to be masculine, is what I was kind of making the point of.
Oh, gotcha.
It can be either feminine or masculine. I think it can go back and forth, you know, between that, and but it's an air being, it's a pneumatic being. So the eagle would be a masculine spirit, where the woodpecker would be both beings of the spirit. The woodpecker would be a more feminine spirit, you know, that never strays too far from the trees, you know. But anyway, I mean, that kind of explains, I don't know if it explains, but it's sort of a way of orienting yourself, you know, in this, when you're doing active imagination. So in your dreams, if you see you're a woman and you see a man, it's going to tend to be your soul or animus figure. Although women are supposed to be soul already, but they and men are not soul; they're more spirit. But I'm not going to get that as defined or particular, granular. But you know, that tends to be your bridge to the other world. In other words, they're going to lead you across the bridge. You know, let me show you here, like this one here. Okay, so there I am with the instincts, and the anima is creating this bridge for me to the other side. You know, so that's sort of the role of the anima. Is
Was that your dream, Craig?
Yes, it is.
So those are all females in the dream?
Well, there was two females, one on both sides of the
Oh.
one on each bank, and then there was a female dog going across. This female instinct going across, and so anyway, that was the idea of the bridge, and the idea there too is that they tend to favor the instinctual world. So the soul tends to favor the instinctual world, and the spirit is totally away from the instinctual world, you know. So it has nothing to do with, it's totally abstract. So
can I jump into your dream?
Sure.
So I think you said something to the effect that if we don't, so speaking as a male, logos sort of a guy, you said something about, you know, if we don't get moving, my soul, my anima may say, well, to hell with you, and kind of become my enemy. So jumping into your dream, if we don't get moving to cross the bridge, they may just say, you know, to heck with you, or the bridge is deteriorated so much you're going to collapse.
They'll be very bitter. I mean, my anima was extremely bitter that I ignored her for so long. I mean, she would, you know, she was a little more bitter than the self was. The self was more in like an attitude of sorrow, where the anima was I was just going to show you this other picture. This was another bridge, and I was to, now there's no anima figure here, but I was to cross the bridge. So it is the anima is the trees, you know. The only way that I could my place in the unconscious, this would be my my inner Bollingen, say, I was to cross the bridge to the place where I was born in. I was born in out of the unconscious. But I first had to force my way across a bridge through a very thick green forest. And so in this case, the anima has kind of taken on a vegetable type of appearance. You know?
And in a sense, that bridge has been there for a long time, and all these trees have grown up, and you know it's
yes,
you've
it's
taken
been long neglected. That's a very good point. It's a long.
So that was how you could
bridge.
That's how you could
rooted in it.
Pardon me? You could tell your anima was bitter because of that dream. You're saying
no, because I had some active imaginations with her. She's since calmed down a little bit, but you know, and she was just blistering, you know. But sometimes the only time I would see her would be I'd be in a room. There'd be it'd be night. There'd be a window, and all I could see was darkness outside the window. Lightning would flash, and I'd see her standing there, stark, and judgmental, you know.
Say,
Just
Craig,
standing there judging. Yes.
can I share a drawing here?
Yes, certainly.
I had exactly the same experience, that my anima was furious
Mm-hmm.
that I had ignored her for so long.
Mm-hmm.
This one's called Extraction.
Mm-hmm.
And
Wow, that's a powerful image.
and you know, there's this kind of horrific backlash from finally coming into consciousness. It's like, my experience was, what the hell were you doing all these years?
That's exact. I've heard that a million times. What have you been doing all this time? You know, you have wasted my existence by your ignoring of me. I've been waiting here and waiting here and waiting, and you never ever and that the idea too is, this is not conceptual. You know, I mean, one of the things that Jung first figured out was that he was not the master in his own house. Okay, so you're not the master in your own house. Who is the master? I mean, always a lot of people have these dreams. I was going to show you one. Here's the anima saying that I'm procrastinating. You know, she's impatient. It's time. It's highest time. You know, stop wasting your life. You know, I mean, and the idea is that your purpose, our purpose, is to after we have biologically produced our biological task. We've had our children. They've grown up. You know, they've moved out. Now what do we do? Well, now this is in Indian philosophy, they call this the forest years, you know, where the man of the house, when that happens, just leaves the family, you know, and he just goes into the forest, you know, and so he's going back into the instinctual life, and the instinctual life is you know, that thing that we were reading with about Marie-Louise von Franz was talking about that the cure for inflation is she was talking about the sun god and his first son that she sent to gamble with the man who had the turquoise, and then that son that he trained to gamble just kept the turquoise and wouldn't give it to the sun god, and then so he had to send a second son to get it. Well, you know what Marie-Louise von Franz said there was that the cure for inflation is the instinctual life. So the cure for the inflation of the ego and the conscious attitude, which overvalues itself, and the thinking function, which overvalues itself. I mean, this is really the disease of this age. Not only don't we have any all our gods are dead, you know, all the symbols that once spoke to us that were collective dogmatic symbols, not only are they dead, but there's been no replacement for them. So this is also, I think, a fortunate thing. You know, I think this is a development in human evolution. Is all our projections need to be wiped out. You know, all the religions, all gods. We need to realize that they're not outside us. You know, and then we need to be thrown onto our own devices now. Well, who's going to help us? The church can't help us anymore. So who's going to help us? Turn in, you know, you have to look within. And so this is, you know, what Marie-Louise von Franz also mentioned beautifully uh, the Naskapi Indians, you know, and I think she says they're in Alaska, but I thought they were in Labrador, you know, which is not near Alaska. It's near, and I think the fact that they're Cree would mean that they're from there too. You might know this, Miles, but anyway, for the Naskapi Cree, a major obligation was to follow the instructions given by his dreams and then give permanent form to their contents in art. One who is receptive to the hints of Mistapeo, the companion within. This is the ally. This is the unique individual self that's not us. I mean, not a universal self. It's one that we were born with, and yet is, you know, as the Sufis said, there is no such thing as a universal God. There's only the unique one that each one of us are born with, and the revelation that each one of us as a unique individual bring into the outer world and make concrete through the dialogue, through the partnership. But this companion also became more real within the receptive person than in those who neglected him. Well, that, you know, that's pretty easy. But they also said that that you needed to compose a song about the dream. So, you know, they would put it in art. They would, now what they're trying to do is to add all four functions to this images that were gifted to them by the unconscious, you know.
I'll just add, to my knowledge, the Cree people extend, they're really, I think, very much a woodland people, and they extend from northern Alberta right through to Quebec, and Labrador is a chunk of.
Well, that's what I
Quebec.
had always heard, that they are from Labrador, but I could be, I don't know. When she said they were related to the Eskimos, and
yeah,
you know, I have this book. I've never read it, but you know, I want.
A lot of Cree people in Quebec, and
yes.
Labrador is carved out of Quebec.
Yes, and so yeah, that was my understanding, but I'm not sure about it. But anyway, did you notice that she mentions in there the not only the dream, which needs to be portrayed in art, and you need to tell others about it, and you need to write make it into a song or a poem, let's say, you know, but it doesn't last, you know, the song grows old, so you need another image. So, and this is the idea of Anna Marjula, but yet the inner companion, you know, I mean, this is absolute, how close to what Jung is talking about in alchemy could this possibly be? You know, one who's receptive to the hints of Mistapeo, the dream writer, the companion within, got better and more helpful dreams. This companion also became more real within the receptive person than in those who neglected him. Well, this is talking about active imagination. This is active imagination, you know.
And what I'd like to just add, you know, as much as I hate to say it, in the formation of Canada in 1867, there was a minister, I think he was actually called superintendent, but he was reporting right to the first prime minister that we had. And the official government policy was to kill the Indian in the child.
By putting him in white schools, you know.
And we've all had, we're all victims of this killing of the indigenous in us by our systems of education and indoctrination, you know. So as you said, Anna Marjolis, she had her instinctual indigenous aspects crushed, and we're many of us are all in that situation today.
Well, to the thinking world, or the straight world, as the Big Lebowski, or as the dude would say, you know, they're silly, these Indians, you know, that's silly. The straight world says, you know, and you don't, you know, we're going to help you. We're going to take all your children away from you and put them in white schools, so they'll be normal, you know. I mean, so, you know, that's that aspect. But the thing is, it's just so amazing. Now, see what she said about these, the Naskapi groups were usually very small, and they were very hunter-gatherer types. So they weren't, you know, they didn't really hunt the buffalo. So they didn't have horses, and they were living, you know, if they were living in Labrador, you know, it's a pretty bleak existence there. I mean, there's woodland areas, but you know, it's so she said that they didn't have to tend to have very organized religions. So their myth was the dream world, you know, that was their informing wisdom, was the dream world. And that this was the whole reason of bringing that up was, we've lost all our gods are dead. All, you know, so I think this could be a positive thing, because to those who are feeling lost, and that I'm not the master in my own house, the ego can't help me now, what do I do? Well, Jung was wondering that too, and he was amazed to find alchemy, because this to him was the more active form of Gnosticism. You know, alchemy, unlike Gnosticism, returns to the earth. So, I mean, the whole idea of alchemy is that body is not neglected. You know, in most Gnostic traditions, it's something you want, is holding you prisoner. So you want to break away from body, and permanently. And this tends to be some of the situation in amongst you know, high Eastern religions as well. I don't think it's true with Zen or with Taoism, you know, but so there are some, you know, very, you know, like I forget, it's the I forget their names, but they're starts with a P. It's a Hindu religion where, you know, that it's the body's evil, you know. But what he found about alchemy is this was what had you know, been in is what he was seeking all along. And that was why when he met Richard Wilhelm, you know, who introduced Chinese alchemy to him, you know, he stopped work on the Red Book.
Well, and
Because
as I said, Dr. Leroy Little Bear of the blood tribe, the Kainai tribe here in Alberta, he talks of the ensoulment of the land to to his people, and you know, ensoulment of the land. Well, that sounds like alchemy.
mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, it's the idea that so appeals to me, and why I think I was just so you know, I was telling Crystal last time that, you know, that if I have a my own myth, it is an alchemical type of a thing, because I was so disembodied, I was so removed from you know, I mean, if you just sit here right now and you just feel your body, I mean, don't you feel certain intensities in it, of that have their own mind? You know, I can feel you know, in my shoulders and in my chest and in my legs, and even in my toes right now, I feel consciousness, you know? And, you know, that's what Jung said, that, and one reason that automatic writing is sometimes can be not so ego related. He says the hands have a voice that the intellect doesn't have. It speaks a different language. And, you know, I
Really?
well, yes. I mean, when you're writing with your hand, it tends to be writing itself to some extent. I mean, sometimes the ego is going along for the ride, but you know, listen to someone who's listen to their voice and what they say and the way they talk, and then read something they wrote. There's sometimes a stark, they're two different voices. I find this particularly true with my wife. You know, I read something that she's written and it is, who is this person? You know, I mean, it's something that's very close to her heart and she writes it, but I don't ever hear that from her voice. I think the writing tends to be a little closer because it's part of our body and not just our head. It tends to be a little closer to the body. So it's a little more instinctual.
That's fascinating. I've never thought of that before. So then I'm curious if I can bother Tim if he's available. So as an artist, if we took this further, then I know that we're talking about automatic writing, but as an artist, then there's also a type of language that the hand produces. Would that be correct?
Also a kind of what?
A language that the hand, a voice that the hand has?
That the brain doesn't have access to.
Right, and when I do my active imagination, oftentimes, in fact, I'll grab my journal and show you. I try to give the hand as much of a voice as possible that's separate from my logos. So what I've done here is I'm having a conversation with my anima, and I'm writing in ink, in blue ink with my right hand. And then I write backwards with my left hand in red for her voice.
Oh, beautiful.
No kidding.
So beautiful. That's
Wow.
a wonderful idea, Tim. It's fabulous.
And of course, you can't read it unless you hold it in the mirror.
Woo.
And this particular one, you could kind of look through the transparent pages. Here, you can see this. So I've written on the back, I've written a dialogue here, and then I flipped the page over and the ink has bled through.
Oh, so you can read it.
Yeah.
That is absolute. Did you come up with that yourself?
Well,
wonderful idea.
To some degree, but Leonardo da Vinci wrote backwards with his left hand, and I'm convinced that he didn't know what that was for, but for one thing, he was left-handed, and it's easier not to smear the ink if you're writing backwards.
Mm-hmm.
But for another thing, you know, it's just absolute. It's the fast lane to the unconscious, and so I thought that was the easiest way to get to it. Now, I've also tried to draw with my left hand, and I find that less helpful, partly because my facility is so bad with my left hand. I'm right-handed and I draw all the time, and I can, you know, my facility is so excellent with my right hand. And this is one of the things that I'm really curious about exploring with you, Craig, is this whole process of active imagination. I have certain tools like my right-handedness that is that are well practiced and smooth and that I'm used to using. And these are all connected to my logos brain, to my left brain. And all the things that are clumsy and unpracticed, like my left hand, or as I mentioned to you before, my dialogue with the dream characters is clumsy. And I want to lean against that tendency to not use the clumsy elements, because that's where I think a lot of the richness comes from. Just like the inferior function is something you want to lean toward so that you become more balanced.
Well, I was just thinking of that as you were speaking, is the clumsiness in us is the unconscious. It's the non-ego. It's not comfortable in the ego world. It is, that's why it appears clumsy. You can't operate in our world. Well, that's what Barbara Hannah's soul told her, is that your world is as strange to us as our world is to yours. In other words, these beings on the left, that are the left hand. I don't think I could ever write with my left hand, but I'm going to try to write backwards. See, I can't even hold a pen.
Well, one of the techniques I use is I'll take a pen in each hand on a piece of paper divided down the middle, and I'll write with my right hand and mirror it with my left hand, so it's easier to write that way. And then if I'm trying to actually put ink to paper, I'll put pressure on the right hand to indicate my voice, and I'll put pressure on the left hand to indicate the other voice. So it just helps me, it helps my facility because of that mechanism in the brain that that makes symmetrical movement so much easier.
That's fascinating. So I'm just curious, there's a significance. Is this consistent for you, Tim? Is there a significance that the right hand with its voice is always writing the question, and the left hand with its voice is always dealing with the dialogue for that question?
Not really, because sometimes the muse or the anima will ask me a question. What the hell are you doing? Or what do you think that means? Or whatever. So it's not necessarily question and answer. It really is an open dialogue.
Yeah. Well, that's what I think would be fun, is for us to we'll start out. I think you'll really like Jeffrey Raff, and I'll send you the link, and maybe we just read the introduction and maybe chapter 1 to start out with. But I think you're going to find that he's, the fact that he's got 40 years of experience in doing active imagination, and he's so practically oriented, and he says when people come to him and they say that they want to do this, he says he's always got a few questions, he's do they have he just is questioning their sincerity and their genuineness, because he says it when you start out, it's very dark. And Jung said this too, when he was first doing his active imaginations, nothing happened. It was very dark, and there was very few movements or anything that came to him. But he says, so the important thing is the persistence. You need to keep doing it. And what Barbara Hannah says, a lot of it is empty, but every once in a while there's a sudden deepening, like this idea of somebody saying, this is not frequent to me, to hear a voice saying something like, "Welcome to our world torn with cruelty." Now, where did that voice come from? It just spoke, but that is what appears in a little bit. And I find also too, if you once you start doing it, they don't like it if you stop. They get a little annoyed, and they'll be
who's they?
Well, these figures in the unconscious that you're having the dialogues with.
Oh, I see. Just the figures.
If you cut it out, they expect you to be devoted to the work, and to be sincere about it, because the whole idea is the ego is secondary. Like I say, last time, and this is a little thought experiment I do, but apparently Jung thought it was true, is that the ego is the dream of the self, not the other way around. The self is not the dream of the ego. So imagine that you're living in this life as the dream of the divine. Okay, now, first of all, to me, that gives me a little bit of a feeling of distance from the world of ordinary reality, from samsara, the whirlwind. I just feel a little bit of distance from that. And I feel that my homeland is not in samsara, in the whirlwind, that my homeland is on the other side of the bridge where all the rooted trees live. That's where I was born. And so it's a kind of a good thought experiment too, but Jung thought it was true, that the ego is the dream of the divine. But I mean, it seems to be a way of thinking that is also is conducive to the development of the shared center. And see, this is exactly what undivided means, and wholeness. I hear people talking about undivided and wholeness. They think it means well balanced. I'm well balanced. I don't. I used to get mad, and now I don't get mad so much anymore. No, it means that you have a shared center. You're not divided from your source that created you anymore. You're not divided from your body. You're not divided from your animal nature. You're not divided from, and this is the alchemical way, which I think is so beautiful. Can you imagine not being divided from your animal nature? And also that you have a inner guide who is going to sustain you through the trials and tribulations of existence, and the pain and suffering of existence. But it really requires, and this is what Anna Marjula was kept being told by the Great Mother over and over and over again. It requires surrender. Now, not surrender in a submissive fashion, but it's the surrender in the fact that when you of losing the critical attitude. I mean, usually when you the critical attitude is the one that tells you none of this is real. This is all. What are you wasting your time with this nonsense for? I mean, this is that was just you making all this up. This is just phony. Did you have something to say, Miles? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, if you don't mind, based on what you just said, and this whole concept of active imagination, where we lend our ego consciousness to other beings and symbols, I'd like to share some thoughts of what Tim's drawing of his angry anima has conveyed to me. And that is that in our current situation with and I'm going to probably upset some people, but this is the journey that I've gone on. And I'll mention Dr. Leroy Little Bear once again at the outset. One of the things he says or encourages people to do is think of all our relations. And in fact, he said, encouraged, when you say grace or at certain points, include all our relations in your meditation or in your saying of grace at mealtime. So, having said that, it's shifted my perspective on things. And this meat and dairy virus, COVID-19, the reason I'm saying meat and dairy virus is because if you look at the sources of all these pandemics, it's from our interaction and really abusive interaction with our animal relatives. It's amazing. I think even the common cold, they said, is from the horse. So that image that Tim presents to me is Mother Nature saying, you're not in control. You may think you're really smart, but I'm calling the shots. And if you don't shape up, I'm not going to tolerate it.
The neglect of the instinctual existence, for sure.
Well, I'm all for that, Miles. I think you're absolutely right. I sometimes think of Mother Nature, who doesn't have this very sharp consciousness, sort of stumbling along thinking, how can I respond in the most compassionate way to this cancer that is the human, the takers culture, the Wasishu culture. And maybe one idea is to use their relationship with animals to bring about a healing, a kind of cleansing. And gosh, what is it but that kind of image that we're dealing with here?
Well, that I always had these dreams about emaciated dogs. I'd open the basement door and up would walk some dog that I hadn't seen for 20 years. It'd been locked in the basement for all this time. So it's this instinctual aspect. We're almost ready to end. Did you, Crystal, do you have any words of wisdom? You don't? Okay. Well, go ahead, Miles.
I give just a quick thing because it's a synchronicity. I just came off listening to John Vervaeke, and he talks about reverence. Talking about our need for reverence for all our relations. Reverence is bridging. Thinking of bridges, reverence is bridging between faith and meaning. That is the notion of reverence. The ability to sense relevance of that which is beyond you, to be appropriately fitted to that which transcends your egocentric framework, to give it what I believe Iris Murdoch calls a justice of attention, that you give it an appropriate attention it deserves to the degree that it deserves. Knowing how to do that is a kind of profound virtue that Woodruff, in fact, argues that reverence is a missing virtue for us.
Well, this is being receptive to Mesta Peo. He'll send you more and better dreams, better images. Well, Gary or Steve or Tim, do you have any closing comments?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Miles, maybe could you send that out to the group? That was really beautiful. It's like, that was a wonderful definition.
Yeah, and I'll send a PDF of ally work, but I think it'd be really fun is if we go through some of the real classics on alchemical, on active imagination, I think ally work, it's so practical and yet it's so profound. Robert Johnson is practical, not quite as profound, but we'll read him. And then, some of Jung's writings on dreams and active imagination, which are in collections, we'll read them. And then some of Barbara Hanna was the one that really introduced active imagination, because it used to be that no one was supposed to talk about it. Jungian analysts were not supposed to talk about it. And then Barbara Hanna, without permission, wrote a book about it. And they said, okay, that we can do it now.
It's out.
So anyway, Steve or Tim, any closing?
This question is more related to what the imagery that Tim shared. I was curious, Tim, do you have prints of that, or is that the original, or was that just a sketch? That was a really powerful image.
This is from a series of work I did in '94 and '95, which ended up being a museum exhibition. And a lot of these drawings are huge. They're 3 feet wide and maybe 6 feet tall.
Wow.
And so I don't have prints of them, but maybe I could put them in a place where you could run through them and look at them, because the whole process is very much exactly what we're talking about. You know, it was my encounter with my anima in the form of my muse. And this whole cycle of falling in love and discovering this dark aspect, and then she becomes monstrous, and I have to sacrifice her. And in the end, there's this kind of angelic presence that appears that to me is the appearance of the self.
Well, I'm really intrigued.
It is. I can't. And people share any dreams or anything else you have. You know, one thing that Gary Sparks says, you know, was that Jungian psychology is not something we do, it's something that happens to us. So, I mean, this is kind of an interesting way of looking at it too. Well, next week, I'll send you guys the link, and we'll just reconvene. And Tim, I'll see you later then. Yeah, okay. We'll see you all next week then. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.